Well, the competition was very weak in your early days, and I don't think the competition is as weak now.
But Charlie, in 2008 and 9, there were all kinds of high IQ,
Yeah.
highly experienced investment professionals. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And you invested at the Daily Journal company in some equities at X that are worth what, 3X or 4X now or something like that?
That's right.
Yeah, well, I call that opportunity, but it may be routine to him, but
Yeah, but I sat for a lot of years before I did it.
but it still became available.
Oh, yes, but you were drowning in opportunities when I first knew you. You were not waiting for...
I wasn't drowning in money, unfortunately.
No, what you lacked was money.
Yeah. Well, now we got money and no ideas. Okay. I don't see how anybody can be other than enthused about this country. If you look back to 1776 or 1789, whichever one you want to date it from, it has been the most extraordinary economic period in the history of the world. In fact, if you go back, I was born on August 30th, 1930. Now, if somebody had come to me in the womb and said, let me tell you what it's like outside now. Yeah, the stock market has just crashed, but you haven't seen anything yet. 4,000 banks are going to fail. The Dow Jones average is going to go down to 42. It was 381 back just a little bit before you were conceived. And it's going to go to 42. They're going to close the banks for a while. We're going to have 25% unemployment. We're going to have the Dust Bowl in the Midwest. The grasshoppers are going to take over. It'd be like in that Woody Allen movie where he says, go back, go back. All that's happened since August 30th, 1930, is that the standard of living of the average American has increased 6 for 1. 6 for 1. That's absolutely incredible. I mean, you look at centuries where nothing happened for the average person. I mean, century after century. So we have a system that works magnificently. It gets gummed up periodically, and it always has troubles. I mean, my father was very anti-New Deal. So my sisters and I sat around a dinner table from the first we can remember hearing how things were going to go to hell. As a matter of fact, my father-in-law told my wife-to-be and her mother that he wanted to have a talk with me before we got married. And he was very much on my side, so I was not in a panic about this or anything. But I went down to his house shortly before the marriage, and this wonderful man, Doc Thompson, sat in a chair for a couple of hours, and he said, Warren, he said, I just want to tell you that you're going to fail, but it's not your fault. And he said, you and Susie, my daughter, if you starve, she would have starved anyway. I mean, it is not your fault. It's because, it's because the Democrats are in, and they're going to take the country down the road to communism, and just don't worry about the fact you're going to fail. And this went on for quite a while. And then he blessed me and we got married. It was a happy ending. But ever since, when I got out of school in 1951, the two people I admired the most in the world, my dad and Ben Graham, both said, you've got a good future, but don't start in stocks now, because there's never been a year when the Dow Jones average has not ended up below 200, and it's above 200 now. It's much too high, and if you start now selling stocks to people, they're going to have bad experiences. And so why don't you go wait a while and go work in the Omaha National Bank or do something, park yourself on the sidelines. There's always negatives. The country always faces problems. I mean, this country went through, it went through a civil war. It's gone through all kinds of things. But what happens? We have a few lousy years from time to time. I mean, we've had probably 15 recessions since the country started. And we will always have a list of 10 or 15 things at the start of the year that will tell you why, this country can't possibly work well. But all I can tell you is that it doesn't do it in a straight line. But the power of capitalism is incredible. I mean, that's what is bringing us out of this recession. I mean, monetary and fiscal policy have some utility, and certainly in the fall of 2008, the government was needed in a huge, huge way. It could do it was the only one that could do what was needed. But if you look at the history of the United States, probably half of our recessions have occurred during, we'll say, in the 19th century, when people didn't even know what fiscal or monetary policy was. I mean, what happened was that excesses would come in, and then the resuscitative power of capitalism would set the country back on the right, on a stronger growth pattern. And that's happened time after time after time. And the game isn't over. I mean, it is not like the potential of America has been used. What has happened is the rest of the world has caught on to some extent. So you're seeing, some state capitalism in places like China, and they're turning economies loose that have been dormant for centuries. But it's not because the people are smarter. It's not because they work harder. It's just because they have tapped into a system that works marvelously over time. And I will tell you, in the next 100 years, you're going to have probably 15, maybe as many as 20 lousy years, but we will be so far ahead of where we are now that will be unrecognizable. Charlie?
Well, I think you can go back a lot farther than that. Europe survived the Black Death, where about a third of the people died. The world is going to go on.
That's wildly optimistic for Charlie. Have you got anything more encouraging than that to say, Charlie?
I don't know. I understand a little bit of Dick Holland's point of view. And by the way, I've known him a long time. He aced me out of any hope of being. What was it?
Can you bring yourself to say anything optimistic?
Well, I have a little bit of a twist on that. And so I would say that you can be cheerful even if things are slightly deteriorating. And that's a very good quality to have. I have a personal saying that has always amused me. I say the politicians are never so bad you don't live to want them back.
Well, on that note of wisdom, well, the answer is the world is flipping a coin every day as to whether people who can literally destroy the planet as we know it, will do it. And unfortunately, the major problem is with people that have large stocks of nuclear weapons.
I know a man who said, I know what I'm going to do if there's a nuclear war. I'm going to crawl under the table and kiss my ass goodbye.
Yeah. Well, it's the great problem of mankind, along with proliferation or the spread of other weapons of mass destruction in the chemical and biological field. The genie is out of the bottle on nuclear knowledge, and more and more people are going to know how to do enormous damage to the rest of the human race as the years go by. You'll have a given percentage of the population that are psychotics or megalomaniacs or religious fanatics or whatever, and will wish ill on their neighbors. And the choke point will be, presumably, materials and to a degree deliverability. I think people generally associate weapons of mass destruction threats these days with terrorists and rogue organizations of some sort, and not so much with with nations. But I regard both as being enormous threats to the future of mankind, and we have not made much progress in that respect. We should be doing everything possible to reduce access to materials. And I've even had a few thoughts on that, which you can look up on the Nuclear Threat Initiative, probably on the website. And I've got a proposal actually that might reduce by a tiny bit the rationale, at least, for all kinds of nations having highly enriched uranium and that sort of thing. But it is the primary problem of mankind. If you've got 6.5 billion people, you're probably going to have, in the world, you're probably going to have close to twice the number of people who wish ill on their neighbor than you had when you had 3 billion people. And for a long time, if you were a psychotic or something, you could pick up a stone and throw it at the guy in the next cave, and you moved on to bows and arrows and rifles and cannon. But for millennia, the ability to inflict massive damage was quite limited, no matter how crazy you were. And since 1945, when Einstein said that the atomic bomb, as they called it then, has changed everything in the world except how men think. That was a comment made shortly after Hiroshima. We live in a world where exponentially has experienced exponential growth in the ability to inflict harm on somebody else, and we haven't gotten rid of the nuts or the people who want to do it. And it is, whether it's Iran or you name it, or whether it's terrorist organizations or whatever, we live in a very, very, very dangerous world on that is getting more dangerous as we go along. And we've been very lucky since 1945. When the Cuban Missile Crisis came along in the 60s, it might have been 50-50. And I think we were lucky we were dealing with Khrushchev, and we were lucky that Kennedy behaved the way he did. But we were lucky. And Charlie and I talked a lot about it in the 60s at the time. But it won't go away. And you would hope, at least in the United States, that we have an administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat, where that's at the top of the agenda, trying to figure out a way to minimize that risk. You can't eliminate it. It is out of the bottle, but we've got to. It should be paramount to minimize the risk that we really get into something that involves, deaths on a scale that nobody's ever contemplated before. Charlie?
Yeah, well, you talk about deaths on a scale that people have never contemplated before. People have recently figured out that the population of Mexico probably had a population decline of 95% caused by European man bringing in his pathogens. And it was a pretty big civilization that went through that little knothole